In this example, we'll be using Visual Basic subroutines and functions to perform temperature conversion. We're going to do this in a few ways. The program, of course, is to enable a person convert between Fahrenheit and Celsius. We're going to use subroutines in a console. We'll use functions in a console, subroutines in the Windows program, and functions in a Windows program. By the end of this, you should be able to use functions and subroutines, and also understand how variables are defined and passed when you are thinking of functions or subroutines. These are the formulae for converting between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So from Celsius to Fahrenheit, you multiply by 9/5 and add 32. For Fahrenheit to Celsius, you take the Fahrenheit temperature, subtract 32, and then multiply by 5/9. I believe you can sort of work it out. Take 32, subtract that when it crosses the equal sign, and then this would also then cross. So you can actually figure out that the formulae are sort of dual of each other. All right. Let's begin with the console application. So I'm going to create a new console application. Right, so that's the name, and I've picked console. That's my main. I'm going to begin by defining two procedures, one subroutine and one function. Alright, so I have a subroutine for Celsius to Fahrenheit and one that does Fahrenheit to Celsius, meaning I'll use these whenever I need to convert between the two temperatures. What I've done is to write the two subroutines, in one case variables, and I am using the formula we just saw. Celsius to Fahrenheit means times 9 divided by 5 plus 32, and Fahrenheit to Celsius means subtract 32 times 5/9, and that's what we have here. Now in the subroutine, the data is going to be collected in the main. Right. So these are the variables that are happening, that find in main. My temperature. I also have a variable to ask the user for options. Right. So I say to the user, make a choice, enter 1 or 2. Right. And I read it into a string. Remember how to use try parse. And you have, when using try parse, a string and the actual number. Try parse is used when you want to get a number, and in this case I want to get a number out of the string the user provided, that string option. So I take it and call try parse. That's my string, that's my number, and by the end of this instruction, information would have been copied from string into the number if the user provided a number. If the number is 1 or 2, that means good options. 1 is convert to Fahrenheit, 2 is convert to Celsius. I'll ask the user for 1, enter the Celsius temperature, and for 2, enter the Fahrenheit temperature. And of course, we will use the same strategy we use for handling the inputs safely. Right. In this case, if we want the temperature, we're getting temperature, that's the string temperature. And once we get that from the user, we are going to use try parse again. But remember, our numeric temperature was defined as a decimal, so it will not be integer.try parse, it will be decimal.try parse. Right? And similarly for the other case. Right? So in either case, I'm going to just get a number into the temperature variable. Right. And after this, I would like to say what my converted temperature is. Right? So I like to print the result. I just defined converted temperature. It's also a decimal. Right? Now, if I run this program, it's not going to do anything because I've not actually calculated the converted temperature. But let me run it just to show you. It will. So enter 1 or 2. If you enter 1, say enter the Celsius temperature, you can enter it, but nothing happens. Of course, if I want to do the other case, Fahrenheit temperature, I can put it in, but nothing happens. It still says a converted result is 0. So what I have to do is to actually use the subroutines to do the work. Right. Now, if you want to use these subroutines, remember there are a few ways to do this. The first method, which I'm going to do, is to use global variables. That is, have variables, so move these variables, just can't call it. I mean, someone will just say, why don't I just call Celsius to Fahrenheit if I want to convert? That means after I get my result, call Celsius to Fahrenheit, or call Fahrenheit to Celsius. Right? Both sound great, right? But the only problem is the two subroutines have no idea the values that were provided in submain. We have to find a way to send the information to those subroutines. Right? So one way, and so this is the first method, is to actually move the definition of the two variables, Celsius and Fahrenheit, into the module. Right? So in other words, when this subroutine is using the variables, they're defined at the module level. So it's actually using something that everyone can see, every subroutine in this module can see. Right? But of course, that still doesn't solve our problem, because if you try to enter a temperature, nothing happens. Right? So what we have to do is to find a way to pass the information, and we actually do have a way now, because these two variables, Celsius and Fahrenheit, are defined at the module level. So in order to let the subroutine see it, all I have to do is, before calling the subroutine, assign my data, whatever value I have, into Celsius, right, into that Celsius variable. And similarly, for the call to Fahrenheit to Celsius, I'll assign it into Fahrenheit. So what that does is, before calling the subroutine, put your data into the shared module variable and then call the subroutine. This way the subroutine has the data. Similarly, if you put your value that you currently have into Fahrenheit variable, the Fahrenheit to Celsius subroutine will now have the values. So see here, the Celsius you're assigned to would come here and it would be used. Similarly, the Fahrenheit you're assigned to would be used by this subroutine. So let's run this and see how it goes. Okay. Oh, there's one more thing. The data is still not coming back. So if you look at it carefully, right, Celsius to Fahrenheit stored its result in Fahrenheit. Means after this subroutine call, the data is in the Fahrenheit variable, and I am going to actually use it when printing. I'll print the converted temperature. So what I'll do is, after the call, I'm going to take the Fahrenheit, that's the subroutine has put the data in, so I'm going to put it into converted temperature so I can use it. Similarly, I can put the Celsius into converted temperature. So what we are doing here is very simple. Before we call the subroutine, there are some variables the subroutine uses. We are going to put our data in, and after the subroutine call, we're going to assign our data, so each one puts it in the other, back into one of the local variables. Converted temperature was only defined in this main, right? And now this should work. 190. Right, so Celsius to Fahrenheit, that's the result. Alright, and I'm just using Google to show, well, it can do interesting things. So 90 Celsius to Fahrenheit, according to this, if I do my search, it says it's 194. Let's, for example, say 200 Celsius to Fahrenheit, do my search, and Google says it's 392. Let's see if my program does the same. So Celsius to Fahrenheit, so pick the first one, and I said 200, and it's 392, so we are doing well. What if we went from Fahrenheit to Celsius? Alright, so let's say 250 Fahrenheit to Celsius. According to this, it's 121.11. Let's try it with ours. Okay, so Fahrenheit to Celsius is option 2, and 250, it's 121.11. Right, so this shows our program is running. Right, so let's quickly go through this code. Right, now I have defined two variables, Celsius and Fahrenheit, at the module level outside any subroutine. So the two subroutines that use conversion can actually access and use these variables. This means before I call this subroutine, Celsius must be assigned a value so that when it converts, it can store. And before I call Fahrenheit to Celsius, I must have assigned Fahrenheit before this subroutine gets called. And that's exactly what is happening here. After I get the information from the user, I assign it to Celsius, then I call Celsius to Fahrenheit. The result goes into Fahrenheit, and so I take Fahrenheit and put it into my converter temperature. Similarly for the other one, I put in Fahrenheit, call Fahrenheit to Celsius, and I copy the data from Celsius into converted temperature. In this example, I am actually using a do loop. So if you've forgotten a do loop, this is a do loop. And of course, I would like my program to end. So what I'm going to do is, in addition to saying enter 1 or 2, I'll also say console.out.writeLine, enter anything else but 1 or 2 to exit. Right. And so that means I can say if 1 or 2, I do my work. In the last case is else. You have a few ways to do this. Let me use until numeric option is not equal to, well, alright, so you can use not. Right, so not means if my numeric is 1 or numeric is 2 and it's the other case, then it should stop. So let me run this just to show you that it's going to work. Right. So if I enter 1, it asks me, I put in data. If I put in something like 5, the program ends. Right. So that's it. Of course, it would be nice to gently tell the user thank you for using my program. Right. So I can use loop until. I can also use while. Right. While, so I'll say while my option is 1 or 2, I should keep going. Right. But that means if it's not 1 or 2, I should leave. So realize until is like the flip of a while. They're just inverses of each other. Right. And this will also work. So for example, I can say 2. Enter temperature, gives me the result. If I enter a result like 6, thank you for using my program. So I've actually covered in this example defining variables, Right, asking user for input, using try pass, using an if else, and of course in the loop how to end it. Of course, if you ever get into trouble and you are not sure, you could also just use a simple if and an exit do. Right, so for example, that is if this would make it exit as well, or someone, well, if you're not very sure of using nots, it's not very clean code, but at least I think you still get the same idea. So in this case, I'll say, well, if it's 1 or 2, don't do anything. If it's not, that's else, exit the do. So you can actually use this as well to break out. Right, I'll leave both, well, all these options in the comments for those who want to see the different ways of exiting do. Right. So this is the first way to do it. Right. So I will end this particular video here. This is the first case using subroutines and a console program. Right. So let me do a slightly advanced form of subroutine usage and then finish the treatment of subroutines. Right. So remember, I'm just going to copy the main to a new module and describe another way subroutines can be used very effectively. Alright, so my main remains. This is the beautiful main we had from before, and of course I do have my two my earlier versions of the subroutine. So Celsius and Fahrenheit are not defined in the module, so it's underlining them. Of course, see at the top. In this second example, I'm going to show you how to pass the data to the subroutines using parameters. Now, using parameters is a very interesting feature. The idea is similar to mathematics when you have y is equal to f of x or g is equal to h of a. What you want to do is to allow the person to write the code in that exact, well, similar way. So there are two things here. So the variables that I would like to use, like Celsius, what I'll do is to take those, right, and you see, put them into bracket, remove the dim. Dim is only when you're declaring within the subroutine itself, but this says Celsius as decimal, meaning I can call this and pass into brackets what I want the Celsius to be. And similar for Fahrenheit, I'm going to move that definition of the variable I want people to pass to me and put it into the brackets with the definition. So Fahrenheit as decimal, meaning someone could call it by passing the data in. Right. Now, of course, I would still like to have my Fahrenheit and Celsius declared outside, except that now instead of doing an assignment, right, so remember previously we were assigning to Celsius, and when it gets there within the subroutine it knows what to use. Now I don't even have to assign. What I'll do is I'll pass into brackets the temperature. That does it. And similarly here I'll pass into brackets the temperature. Right. Now if Fahrenheit is using this, what's going to happen is the numeric temperature will be passed and assigned into this. So it's almost like you're defining your variables, but someone calling it, when they put into brackets, that value is assigned. So when you enter your subroutine, it actually starts using it. So parameters are a bit like defining variables within the call itself. So someone calling can immediately assign the value. So someone calling this would have called it as Celsius. think there is a small spelling. Yeah, sorry about that. It's with an S. Right. Right. And that would mean when you make the call, put 10 into Celsius. That's basically what it means. Right. Or 100. This would mean put 100 into Celsius when making this call. So if there's a variable inside, that means whatever the value is when I'm calling it, put that into Celsius. And that's what's going to happen for both cases. So let's run this and see how the new one runs. So let's run this. Right. So 190, 194 is actually working. 250 was 121.11. Right. So that's what we actually mean by parameters. And you've actually seen parameters a bit. When you do write line, this is a parameter. It means someone has written a write line, like let me see, sub write line, and it's a string. So my data as string. Right. So that's what's happening for you to make this write line, and you pass the string inside. That means someone has defined a subroutine that takes that string, so it assigns it and uses it immediately. You don't need to have global module variables in order to pass data. So this is a very useful way for sharing information with subroutines, and it's by using parameters. That's into bracket, you pass the data that you want. Okay, so that is the first case, using subroutines and the console program. I'll make another video shortly for using functions and the console program.